In 1976, a man in Memphis started a charcoal fire in his backyard at 6 in the morning on the 4th of July. Before 7, the smoke was thick enough to reach the street. Around 9, his brother-in-law had arrived with the folding chair and positioned himself beside the grill with a brown paper bag between his knees and no intention of moving until the food was ready. Before 11, the table was covered end to end with foil-wrapped dishes brought by women who had been cooking since Thursday. Each dish was positioned carefully, and each woman stood near her contribution for the first 30 minutes to make sure every person who picked up a plate knew who had made what. By 2 in the afternoon, there were more people in that yard than had been invited because the smoke was the invitation and the smoke did not check the guest list. The 4th of July cookout in a black neighborhood in the 1970s went beyond a picnic. It was a family trial where every woman's kitchen was being judged, and every man's fire was being evaluated, and the children ran between the tables, stealing deviled eggs and freezer pops, while the adults pretended not to notice.
Number 20 is the dish that started more arguments than money. Number 9 is the cake that proved which woman in the family could really bake. And number 1 is not a food at all. Hit that subscribe button. Here are 25 forgotten foods served at every Black 4th of July cookout in the 1970s. Number 25. The whole rack of ribs, not pre-cut, not trimmed, not store-bought in a vacuum bag. The rack was rubbed the night before with salt, pepper, paprika, garlic powder, and whatever else the man at the grill considered his personal secret. It went on the grate at 7 in the morning and smoked for 5 to 6 hours while the pitmaster sat beside it in a lawn chair, monitoring the temperature with his hand above the grate. The ribs were the reason the fire started at dawn. Everything else on the table could be prepared that morning. The ribs required the overnight rub and the 6-hour cook, and the man who tended them considered the job important enough to refuse every request for help with chairs, tables, ice, or anything else that would have taken him away from the smoke. The ribs were his contribution. The chair beside the grill was his office. The brown paper bag was his lunch. The ribs that came off that grill at 1 in the afternoon were the product of a 7-hour commitment by a man who had turned down every offer to help because the ribs were his territory and his territory did not accept volunteers. When the ribs were finally cut and plated, the first rack went to the oldest person present because the oldest person had been eating those ribs the longest, and their opinion carried the most weight. A nod from the elder meant the ribs were right. Silence meant the pitmaster had another year of work to do. Number 24. Chicken quarters marinated overnight. Leg and thigh attached, soaked since the night before in a mixture of hot sauce, vinegar, garlic, and seasoning salt. Grilled over direct heat until the skin charred and the marinade set into a sticky glaze that turned the chicken red from the outside and tender from the bone. The red chicken was the grill item that disappeared fastest because the chicken was ready before the ribs and the crowd was hungry by noon. A woman in Birmingham said the red chicken at her family's cookout was red from Louisiana hot sauce mixed with Italian dressing. The combination should not have worked, but it produced a flavor that every family member has been trying to replicate since the woman who invented it stopped cooking in 1992. The red chicken was also the grill item that told you whose cookout you were at because every family's marinade was different and the color of the chicken announced the recipe before the taste confirmed it. A dark red meant hot sauce and vinegar. A lighter red meant paprika and oil. An orange tint meant someone had used French dressing, and that someone was judged accordingly. Number 23. Smoked links and sausage, the cheap protein that stretched the grill while the ribs finished. Hot links were split lengthwise and laid flat on the grate until both sides blackened and the casing snapped when you bit into it. Smoked sausage was sliced into coins and piled onto white bread with mustard. The hot links and the sausage were the grill's opening act, served to the crowd that had been standing around the smoke since 10 in the morning, waiting for the ribs to finish. No one drove to the cookout for the hot links. Everybody ate 3 of them before the ribs came off, because the hot links were ready first and the hunger did not negotiate with the schedule. Hot links at a cookout served a social function beyond the food. Standing around the grill eating a hot link on white bread with mustard was the cookout's version of the lobby before the main event. The men talked at the grill. The women talked at the table. The hot links fed the grill conversation because the grill conversation was the real reason half the men were standing there, and the hot links gave them something to do with their hands while they talked. Number 22. Hand-patted hamburgers, not frozen preformed patties from a box. The ground beef was mixed with diced onion, seasoning salt, black pepper, and sometimes an egg to hold it together, patted into thick rounds by hand and placed on the grill where the fat dripped into the coals and flared, and the outside charred while the inside stayed pink. Hand-patted burgers at a 1970s cookout were seasoned the way a steak would be seasoned, because the woman who mixed the meat considered an unseasoned hamburger an insult to the people she was feeding. A preformed frozen patty at that table would have been treated the way a store-bought cake would have been treated. Everybody would have eaten it. Nobody would have respected it. The hand-patted burger was also the grill item that the children ate most because the burger fit their appetite and the bun fit their hands and the ketchup fit their palate. A child's plate at a cookout was a hamburger, a hot dog, a scoop of baked beans, and a cup of red Kool-Aid. That plate was eaten on the ground or on the steps or walking between groups of adults. Never at a table. Children at a 1970s cookout ate wherever they stopped moving. The hand-patted burger left a grease stain on the paper plate that soaked through to the hand underneath. The hand was wiped on the shorts because the napkins were on the table and the table was not going back until the plate was empty. If the grill brought you back to that yard, the table is where the real competition was happening. Number 21. Dogs split down the middle. Grilled flat so both sides charred and the edges curled and the inside opened to hold the mustard and the relish. When the buns ran out, and the buns always ran out because nobody ever bought enough, the hot dogs went on white bread. A child at a 1970s cookout eating a charred hot dog on white bread with yellow mustard considered the meal equal to anything the world had to offer. The bread soaking through with grease and the mustard running off the edges counted as a feature rather than a flaw, but a feature of eating outside on a day when the rules were suspended. The hot dog was the cookout's most democratic food. It required no skill to prepare, no recipe to follow, and no reputation to protect. The man at the grill who spent 7 hours on the ribs spent 30 seconds on the hot dogs. The hot dogs were consumed with equal enthusiasm by children who did not yet understand the difference between a food that took all day and a food that took half a minute. Number 20, the potato salad, the dish that started more family arguments than money, politics, and religion combined. Every woman at the cookout had a potato salad recipe. Every woman believed hers was the best. The debate was never settled because the debate was never really about the potato salad. The debate was about which woman ran the best kitchen, and the potato salad was the evidence presented annually on the 4th of July. Mustard-based with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, celery, onion, paprika on top. The mustard made it yellow, and the yellow was the correct color. Any woman who brought a white potato salad to a black cookout in 1974 would have been asked politely whose recipe she was using, and the answer would have determined whether the dish was taken seriously. The potato salad sat in the center of the table because the center was where the winning entry belonged. A woman in Houston brought her potato salad in the same yellow bowl every year for 15 years. When the bowl cracked in 1981, she bought a new bowl that was not yellow, and her sister-in-law said the potato salad tasted different. It was the same recipe. The bowl was the only change. The sister-in-law insisted the yellow bowl was part of the flavor, and the argument lasted 3/4 of July before a new yellow bowl was found and the matter was considered settled. Number 19. Baked beans doctored from the can. The can of pork and beans was the starting point, not the recipe. Brown sugar, bacon cut into pieces, diced onion, yellow mustard, and sometimes ketchup, stirred together in a baking dish and baked in the oven until the top browned and the sauce thickened into something the can itself would not have recognized. A woman in Atlanta said her mother's baked beans took 2 hours in the oven and started with a 50-cent can and ended tasting like something that should have cost $5. The can was the foundation. The woman was the architect. Baked beans at the Cookout proved something about black cooking that no restaurant has ever been able to replicate. A 50-cent ingredient became a $5 dish through the application of time, heat, and a grandmother who refused to serve anything that tasted like it came from a can, even when it started. In 1. Number 18. Deviled eggs. The plate that was empty before the ribs came off the grill. Boiled, halved, the yolk scooped out and mixed with mayonnaise, mustard, sweet pickle relish, salt and pepper, piped or spooned back into the white, and dusted with paprika. Deviled eggs occupied a specific role at the Cookout, the appetizer that nobody called an appetizer, eaten standing up while waiting for the real food. The woman who brought them counted the eggs before the Cookout and counted the empty plate by noon. The empty plate was the only compliment she needed. The eggs were also the Cookout's most vulnerable dish because they sat in the July heat without refrigeration, and the mayonnaise inside them was working against the clock from the moment the plate left the kitchen. Every woman who brought deviled eggs knew the risk, and brought them anyway because the deviled egg plate was a position of honor at the table, and the woman who held it every year until she passed it to her daughter. The deviled egg recipe varied from family to family in ways that the women who made them considered significant, and the people who ate them could rarely detect. One grandmother added a drop of pickle juice. Another added a pinch of sugar. Another swore by Durkee sauce. The variations were defended with the conviction of women who believed their version was the original and every other version was a deviation. Number 17. Baked macaroni and cheese. The custard-set casserole, not stovetop, made with eggs, evaporated milk, 3 kinds of cheese, butter, and seasoning, baked until the top browned into a crust that cracked when the serving spoon broke through it. Baked macaroni and cheese at a black Cookout went beyond a side dish. It was an audition. The woman who brought it knew her macaroni would be compared to every other macaroni at the table, and to the memory of every macaroni every person at that table had ever eaten. A thin or soupy macaroni was a public failure. A firm, creamy, golden-crusted macaroni was a reputation earned for the rest of the year. The cheese was typically a combination of sharp cheddar, mild cheddar, and Velveeta. The Velveeta was the secret nobody admitted to, because admitting to processed cheese at a table where everything else was made from scratch felt like a contradiction. But the Velveeta melted smoother than any natural cheese, and the woman who used it knew the texture was worth the confession she would never make. The macaroni arrived at the Cookout still warm from the oven, with the crust intact, and the first person to break the crust with the serving spoon was performing a public act, witnessed by every woman at the table. If the interior was creamy and the cheese pulled in strings, the macaroni was a success. If the interior was dry or grainy, the serving spoon told the truth before anyone tasted it. Number 15 is the vegetable that nobody argued about because nobody had a reason to. Number 16. Collard greens brought in the covered pot. Cooked at home starting Thursday, simmered with smoked ham hock or turkey neck for 3 hours until the pot liquor turned dark and the greens went soft and tender. Transported in the car in the covered pot with a towel wrapped around the base to keep it from sliding, the greens arrived at the Cookout already finished because collard greens cannot be cooked on a grill, and the woman who made them knew the greens needed 3 days of seasoning and simmering to reach the flavor. She was willing to put her name on. Collard greens at the cookout were the only dish that nobody brought a competing version of because the family already knew whose greens were the best, and that woman was assigned the greens the way of starting. Pitchers assigned the opening game. The greens arrived with the pot liquor still in the pot, because the pot liquor was sopped with cornbread. The cornbread was provided by whoever was assigned it, and the cornbread assignment was the second most important assignment at the cookout after the greens. A woman in Charlotte carried her greens to the cookout in the back seat of a Buick Electra with a towel around the pot. She said a prayer at every left turn that the pot would not tip. The prayer was answered 11 consecutive years until 1983, when it was not. Number 15, corn on the cob, boiled in a big pot on the stove or on a propane burner outside, buttered and salted and eaten with both hands, while the butter ran down to the wrist. The corn was the one item at the cookout that required no recipe, no competition, and no reputation. Everybody's corn tasted the same because the corn was the corn. The only variable was how much butter and how much salt, and the answer to both was more than you think. The corn was the one food at the cookout that united every generation without controversy. The children ate it. The elders ate it. The teenagers who were too cool to sit with the family ate it standing by the fence. Corn on the cob at a cookout was the peace treaty on the table, the dish that required no allegiance to any cook and simply asked to be eaten with butter and salt in the sun. A child with a cob of corn in both hands and butter on both cheeks was a child who had achieved the cookout's purest moment, food consumed with total concentration and zero concern for appearance. The corn cob was the one item that returned to the trash stripped completely clean, because the teeth left nothing behind. Number 14, coleslaw. The vinegar kind, not the creamy kind, made with shredded cabbage, carrot, sugar, vinegar, salt, and celery seed. Coleslaw existed at the cookout table for one reason: to cut through the richness of the pork ribs and the sausage so the next bite of meat tasted as good as the first. The slaw was the reset button. No one went to the cookout for the slaw. Everybody's plate had a scoop of it beside the ribs, because the mouth needed the acid after 3 bites of smoke and fat, and the slaw provided it without asking for any credit. Coleslaw is the most underappreciated item on this list, because nobody has ever gone to a cookout excited about the slaw. It arrives without ceremony, sits at the edge of the table, and performs its function quietly. A cookout without slaw is a cookout where the third plate of ribs tastes like the first. And the difference between wanting a third plate and stopping at 2 is the scoop of vinegar cabbage that cleared the palate between servings. The woman who made the slaw received no praise and expected none, because the slaw was a supporting actor in a cast of stars. But the supporting actor held the performance together. The one year the slaw was forgotten, the ribs tasted heavier, and the plate felt like it was missing something no one could name until someone said, "Where is the slaw?" Number 13, Hoghead cheese, sliced cold from the loaf and served on crackers. Hoghead cheese separated the generations at the cookout the way chitterlings separated the family at Christmas. The older men ate it without hesitation. The younger generation asked what was in it, received the answer, and walked away. The head cheese sat at the end of the table near the pickled pig feet and the deviled ham. That end of the table was the older generation's territory, guarded by men in lawn chairs who considered the younger generation's refusal a sign of weakness, and said so without lowering their voices. The loaf was made from the meat of the pig's head, simmered until it fell from the bone, then pressed into a loaf, with the natural gelatin holding the meat together as it cooled. The loaf was sliced thin and served cold on crackers with hot sauce. The taste was mild and savory. The objection was never to the taste. The objection was to the name and to the knowledge of where the meat came from. And the older generation considered that objection proof that the younger generation had been given too much comfort to appreciate what the previous generation had learned to eat. If you want to cook any of these dishes the way they tasted at those cookouts, the Grandma Made Away collection has the recipes finally written down. Link in the description. Number 12. The red drink. Cherry Kool-Aid mixed in a 5-gallon cooler with twice the sugar the packet called for and enough ice to keep it cold until evening. The red drink went beyond a beverage. The red drink was a landmark. It sat on the end of the table or on the ground beside the cooler. Every child returned to it a dozen times, and every child went home with a red stain around the mouth that soap could not remove until the following morning. The red drink tasted like summer and sugar and childhood, and it has never been replicated in adulthood because the recipe requires being 7 years old and standing in a yard full of cousins on a day when nobody told you to come inside. Number 11. The sweet tea in the gallon jug. So sweet the spoon could almost stand up in it. Brewed strong, sweetened while hot, so the sugar dissolved completely, poured over ice into a glass that sweated immediately in the July heat. The sweet tea was the adult drink that was not the adult drink, consumed by the people who were not holding the brown paper bag. Sweet tea at a cookout was not optional. It was as fundamental as the ice and the foil and the folding chairs. And the person who forgot to bring it was reminded of the failure for the rest of the summer. A woman in Savannah brewed her teas so strong that the sugar dissolved into a syrup before the ice hit the glass. She said weak tea was just brown water, and she refused to serve brown water to people she respected. Sweet tea at a cookout was consumed by the gallon because the July heat demanded constant hydration, and the sweetness of the tea replaced the energy the sun was taking. The jug was refilled twice during a full cookout, and the ice bucket beside it was refilled 3 times. The person assigned to ice duty considered the assignment beneath them until the ice ran out, and every adult within earshot made it clear that ice duty was the most important job at the event. Number 10. The brown paper bag. The beers and the stronger drinks carried in brown paper bags that the adults held between their knees in the lawn chair, and the children were told to go play when they asked what was inside. The brown bag was the cookout's open secret, understood by every adult and invisible to every child. Nobody explained why Uncle Earl became funnier as the afternoon went on, or why Aunt Shirley told him to sit down before he embarrassed himself. The brown bag was never discussed, and the contents were never named in front of the children. The empties disappeared before the streetlights came on because the evidence of a good time was managed with the same discipline as the evidence of a clean house. A man in Jackson said he learned what was in his uncle's brown bag at 14. By then, the uncle had been holding that bag at the same cookout in the same lawn chair for a decade. The revelation changed nothing about the memory except the laughter that now accompanied it. The dessert table was a separate event from the rest of the cookout, and the entries ahead are where reputations were made or destroyed. Number 9. Pound cake from scratch. Not boxed, not from a bakery, baked from butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and vanilla in a bundt pan by a woman who considered a boxed cake mix an admission of defeat. The pound cake was the cake that proved which woman in the family could really bake, because a pound cake has nowhere to hide. There is no frosting to cover a dry crumb, no filling to mask an underbaked center. The cake stands on its own, and the woman who baked it stood beside it at the dessert table and waited for the verdict that arrived one slice at a time. Number 8. Sweet potato pie, not pumpkin. The filling made from boiled sweet potatoes mashed with butter, sugar, eggs, nutmeg, cinnamon, and vanilla, poured into a crust and baked into the center set and the top darkened slightly. Sweet potato pie at a black cookout was not a dessert option. It was a cultural declaration. The sweet potato pie said, "This is who we are, and this is what our kitchen produces. And if you came looking for pumpkin, you came to the wrong table." The sweet potato pie at a black cookout was made from real sweet potatoes boiled on the stove and mashed by hand, not from a can. The difference between a pie made from boiled sweet potatoes and a pie made from canned filling is the difference between an hour of peeling and boiling and 30 seconds opening a can. The dessert table at a 1970s cookout could tell which was which from the first bite. The sweet potato pie was also the dessert that the older generation defended most fiercely against the suggestion that pumpkin pie was the same thing. It was not the same thing. The sweet potato carried a density and a sweetness that pumpkin could not match. The spice profile, heavy on nutmeg and light on cinnamon, was calibrated across generations of women who considered the ratio a family secret worth protecting. Number 7. Banana pudding with Nilla wafers layered in a glass dish so the layers were visible from the side. Vanilla custard, sliced bananas, and Nilla wafers stacked in rows until the dish was full, then chilled until the wafers softened and absorbed the custard, and the whole thing became one texture. The banana pudding was served with a large spoon, and the portions were generous because the dish was cheap to make. The woman who made it knew the pudding would be the first dessert to disappear because the children would eat it before touching anything else on the table. The banana pudding existed in 2 versions: the from-scratch version with homemade custard cooked on the stove, and the instant version made with Jell-O pudding mix. The women who made the scratch version considered the instant version a shortcut. The children who ate both versions could not tell the difference and did not care. The banana pudding vanished regardless of method. Number 6. Peach cobbler in the aluminum pan. Bubbling at the edges, the crust golden and cracked on top. The peaches soft and sweet underneath. Served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream that melted into the juice within 30 seconds. The cobbler arrived at the cookout in the same disposable aluminum pan it was baked in, because no woman was going to risk her good baking dish at a cookout where the dishes went home with the wrong person half the time. The aluminum pan was the cookout's insurance policy. The cobbler inside it was irreplaceable. The pan was not. A peach cobbler that arrived warm was eaten within an hour. A peach cobbler that arrived cold was reheated if the host had oven room. If not, the cobbler was eaten cold, and no one complained because cold peach cobbler is still peach cobbler. Any complaint about free cobbler would have been met with a look that ended the conversation. Number 5. Homemade ice cream from the churn. Someone brought the hand-cranked churn, and the children took turns cranking until the resistance built and the cranking slowed, and the ice cream inside thickened into something that no store-bought carton could match. Vanilla with real vanilla extract, sometimes peach, sometimes strawberry, from the berries that were in season. The ice cream was ready by mid-afternoon and was gone within an hour because homemade ice cream cannot be saved. It melts into a sweet liquid within minutes of leaving the churn, and the urgency of eating it before it disappeared was part of the experience. The hand-cranked churn was the cookout's loudest appliance. The wooden handle creaking and the ice scraping against the metal canister while the children cranked and complained and were told to keep going by an uncle who had done no cranking himself. When the handle stopped turning, the lid came off and the first scoop went to the child who had cranked the longest. And the injustice of who had actually cranked the most was debated with the same intensity as the potato salad. The ice cream from the churn had a texture that no store-bought carton could match, because the churning produced tiny ice crystals that made the cream denser and smoother than anything a factory could replicate. A man in Baton Rouge said his grandmother's peach ice cream from the churn was the single best thing he has ever eaten. He has spent 40 years telling people this, and 40 years being unable to prove it, because the grandmother and the churn are both gone. Number 4. Watermelon cut in quarters and eaten outside. Seeded, not seedless, because seedless watermelon did not exist in the 1970s, and the seeds were spit into the grass by children who turned the spitting into a competition. The watermelon was cut on a table covered in newspaper, and the slices were thick and dripping, and eaten standing up because the juice ran down to the elbow and no chair or plate could contain the mess. Watermelon at a black cookout in the 1970s was eaten without the self-consciousness that a later generation attached to it. In 1974, a black family in their own backyard eating watermelon on the 4th of July was a family enjoying fruit on a hot day, and nothing more. The seeds were spit competitively. The rinds were discarded in a pile that grew throughout the afternoon. The watermelon was the cookout's intermission, eaten between the main meal and the dessert table, standing up, dripping, with no concern for the shirt or the shoes or the ground beneath. The watermelon was freedom, and the 4th of July was the day that freedom was supposed to mean. Number 3, the freezer pops. Flavor ice pulled from the styrofoam cooler, the plastic wrapper snipped with scissors that an auntie kept in her purse for exactly this purpose. Cherry, grape, blue raspberry, and orange, distributed to every child who asked, and to several who did not ask, but simply appeared at the cooler with the look that communicated the request without words. The freezer pop was the children's currency at the cookout, consumed in 4 minutes and requested again within 10. The auntie with the scissors controlled the economy with a generosity that increased as the afternoon went on. The freezer pop was the last item consumed at the cookout, pulled from the cooler at dusk when the ice had mostly melted and the remaining pops were floating in cold water. A child eating a blue freezer pop at 8 in the evening with charcoal smoke still in the air was experiencing the last moment of the cookout. That moment tasted like blue raspberry and smelled like smoke and felt like the kind of day that would never come again, even though it came again every year. Number 2, the aluminum foil over everything. Every dish covered, every plate wrapped, every leftover sealed for the ride home. The roll of foil was the most important non-food item at the cookout, used more often than the napkins and the paper plates combined. One sheet covered the potato salad against the flies. Another sheet wrapped the ribs for the person who had not arrived yet. Foil sealed the take-home plates that every guest assembled before leaving. Each plate a compressed summary of the entire cookout stacked in layers and carried to the car with both hands. The foil was the cookout's filing system. Wrapped the ribs for the person who had not arrived yet. Foil sealed the take-home plates that every guest assembled before leaving. Each plate a compressed summary of the entire cookout stacked in layers and carried to the car with both hands. The foil was the cookout's filing system, and the woman who managed it managed the most important logistics of the day. The take-home plate was the cookout's final ritual. Every guest assembled a plate of leftovers before leaving, ribs on the bottom, potato salad and macaroni in the middle, a piece of pound cake on top, sealed in foil and carried to the car with both hands. The take-home plate meant the cookout continued into the next day. Monday lunch at work was a cold rib eaten at a desk from a foil-wrapped plate that still smelled like Saturday's smoke. And if you want to carry any of these recipes forward, the Grandma Made Away collection is in the description. Number 1. The yard. There is no food at number 1 because the most important thing at a Black 4th of July cookout in the 1970s was not on the table. It was the yard itself. The folding chairs arranged in a circle under the tree. The card table with the wobbly leg propped up with a piece of wood. The radio on the porch playing Stevie Wonder and Earth, Wind and Fire. The man at the grill who had not left the smoke since 6 in the morning. The woman who made the potato salad positioned beside her dish, making sure every person who took a scoop made eye contact so she could receive the nod. The uncle who fell asleep in the lawn chair by 4. The cousins running between the tables. The grandmother sitting in the good chair, brought from inside the house because the folding chairs hurt her back, watching all of it and eating her plate slowly because the food mattered less than the family. The family was the point. The food was how the family proved it was still together, and the cookout was the annual evidence that, whatever the year had done to scatter them, one day in July was enough to bring them back. The smoke brought the neighbors, the table brought the family, and the yard held both of them for one day in July. What has disappeared is not the food, because every dish on this list can still be made. What has disappeared is the day itself. The all-day cookout where the fire started at dawn and the last guest left after dark, and the children fell asleep in the car on the way home with red Kool-Aid stains on their shirts and charcoal smoke in their hair. The food was the same every year because the food was the tradition, and the tradition was the proof that the family was still intact. The yard was not a venue. The yard was a promise kept annually by people who understood that the family that eats together on the 4th of July is the family that survives the other 364 days. The man at the grill started the fire at 6 in the morning because the ribs took 6 hours and the family deserved ribs that were cooked right. The women started cooking on Thursday because the potato salad needed to set and the greens needed 3 days and the pound cake needed to cool overnight. The children contributed nothing to the preparation and consumed everything at the table and went home exhausted and sunburned and stained and happy. The cookout took a week to prepare and a day to eat and a year to remember. And the memory was always better than the food because the memory included the people. Drop what your family always had at the 4th of July cookout in the comments. The red chicken, the mustard potato salad, the baked beans from the can, the pound cake, the freezer pops, the foil over everything. Because these 25 foods are not a menu. They are a photograph of a day that the family spent a week preparing for and a year remembering. The ribs that took 7 hours, the potato salad that started the argument, the red Kool-Aid that stained the shirt, the pound cake that proved who could bake, the foil plate carried home with both hands, the yard that held them all. That day is still happening somewhere, and the food is still the reason the family shows up.